thought we'd give it a try, and I'm really tickled to see so many people interested in this and how many people have been able to join us this morning. So welcome everybody. We appreciate your interest in this, and we've got a really fun call lined up for today that I think you're going to really enjoy, and I think it's going to be inspiring for a lot of us. A few months back, oh, maybe it was even way back in the winter time, I was down in Las Cruces visiting with Casey Myers, and he took me over to meet one of the farmers that he works with there. And Josh Bowman is the farmer who we're going to be featuring this morning, and we really appreciate Josh being able to join us this morning and share a little bit of his experiences and his outlook and some of the things that he's been able to accomplish by transitioning his farming system from a more conventional type of a system over to one that's more sustainable and more regenerative and focused a lot on soil health. So we really appreciate that, and we appreciate everybody being on hand today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Casey and ask Casey to give us a little bit more of a detailed introduction to Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. As Mark mentioned, our speaker on soil health this morning is Josh Bowman. Josh is a producer here in Mesquite, New Mexico, which is just south of Las Cruces. Josh farms pecans. Him and his family have a 120-acre pecan farm that they work on. And I had the pleasure of meeting Josh last year in the fall. I was pretty new to the NRCS still, and as someone who has a background in range management, I really got thrown into the pecan world. If you're not aware, Las Cruces has a lot of pecans in that valley, so that's a lot of the job for soil con. So it was daunting to me, and I was blessed to be able to go out and meet with Josh and have some conversations, and he shared a lot of knowledge with me. As far as the pecan operations, the ins and outs, how you implement soil health practices in an orchard setting, all of that was new to me. And so it was an incredible learning experience for me. And it seems the more that I've been able to get out and talk with Josh at his farm, the more I've been able to learn. So when Mark brought up the subject of having some success stories on for our soil health call, Josh immediately popped in my head because I know I've learned a lot from him, and I bet everyone here will be able to learn a lot from him as well. So without taking too much more time, I will hand things off to Josh Bowman.
Thank you, Casey. And I'm sorry, excuse me for just a second, Josh. I just wanted to mention to everybody, we are recording this. So if there's anything that you don't want people to know, don't talk. Okay. Thanks, Josh. It's all yours.
Guys, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you very well. Thank you.
Great. Let me ask one more. Am I visible on video? I had my camera on, but I don't know how Microsoft, can you see me on here?
It's a little blurry, but we can see you. I think we'll be fine.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you for the invitation, first of all. I really appreciate this opportunity, and when we spoke there with Casey not long ago, and he mentioned this opportunity, I wanted to certainly be willing to share what we have been learning and what we are learning and what we're excited about. So that's my desire today, is to just communicate the things that are happening here and kind of what we do, and share a little bit of a background about myself. To start, I'd like to do that. Give me just a minute here. I need to get my screens pulled up. Okay, first of all, just want to say this is kind of a new experience for me, and so bear with me as I work through some of this. But yes, my name's Josh Bowman, and I'm from, I grew up in the Midwest in the state of Ohio, actually on a corn and soybean farm. And my dad and my family farmed there. That's all I ever knew. That's all I ever thought I would do. And my dad was an agronomist there for all of my lifetime. And in 2007, well, we moved to the state of Washington and moved to a church that was located out there, kind of a new apple farming operation. My dad was offered a job there at that time. And so we moved from the Midwest farming corn and beans to the Northwest, Washington State, in 2007. So I lived there for 9 years with my family. My dad had bought a farm. I became kind of the farm manager. And so I started doing that at 16 years old. And that's really all I've ever done since is operate orchard, tree fruit, and then now in the last 5 years, tree nuts, and specifically pecans here in New Mexico. So in 2016, my family, I was married and I had a baby. We adopted our oldest son here in 2015, and so we moved a year later in 2016 to New Mexico and started looking for work. And it just so happened that there was a pecan grower looking to hire a farm manager. So I took the position, and I guess that brings us up to today of how we ended up here in southern New Mexico. So with that, I would like to share my screen here, Mark, and you might need to help me do that because I did have some pictures I thought I would share as I talk to kind of help illustrate. Could you point me the right direction in that?
Yeah, that's terrific, Josh. Thank you. Up on the, let's see here, where the heck is that now? Trying to remember where we've got screen share on this one. If anybody out there in the audience knows off the top of your head and you want to just shout out, that's terrific.
Let me give you a hand there. So, Josh, if you look at the top right-hand side, you're going to see a red button that says leave.
Mhm.
Just to the left of that, there is a rectangle with an arrow in it. So click on that rectangle, white rectangle with an arrow in it. Do you see that?
Yep.
And then when everything refreshes, you'll see up at the top left, you'll see like some screens, and it's like take a choice of these two screens. Choose the screen on your left-hand side, and that will show everybody what you're looking at. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There.
Thank you,
There you go.
Steve. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So that work?
Yeah.
Yep, we're seeing some nice pictures of your family here.
Oh, perfect. All right. Well, good. I just wanted to start out by just saying this is my family here. These are my children. I've been blessed. My wife and I've been to adopt them, each one of them through the years. And this picture was taken this spring here on our farm. And just a little bit about myself, a little continuation here is we started farming here in 2016 on this pecan operation. And as I showed up here and started working with the old man, I was just an employee working for $10 an hour, and things were good. But as you know, when you're in the field of consulting or when you've worked with crops all your life, it's hard just to work as a laborer, driving tractors through the field without letting all the thoughts come flooding in of what could be improved. So I dealt with that as I would sit there and spray these zinc and magnesium, manganese, copper, iron sulfates on these trees that just looked a little bit sick. It was hard for me to not think of how we could get this thing more in shape. And so about a year passed, and I had been speaking with my dad about some things and about the pecan operation. What I observed in pecan production is this is amazing. We have a forest, we have flat fields, we have all the water we need in abundance. We had 5 acre feet of water available to us here in this part of the world, in this valley. And we have irrigation systems, and we have terrible soils and just, subpar crops. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? So what we started doing is we started implementing, and at the time I worked for the old man, and I recommended that we start foliar feeding our pecans to improve production. So we we dove into that, and I recommended that we buy some nutrients and put together some foliar recommendations that we spray our pecans as they leaf out in the spring, see if we could improve our production. So with a little bit of few trials in the process, the farmer agreed to let us to buy some different nutrients, and we started that year. This was 2017. We started foliar spraying our pecan crop. Long story short, through that season, within about 2 weeks, we already saw improvements on the crop. And by that fall, he was interested in selling the farm and letting us take it over. And so my father-in-law at the time was selling out of his business and decided he was interested in investing. So with all that, I took over management in the fall of 2017. And since then, we have been running the operation ourselves. So that was kind of how we got to the point of managing a pecan farm in southern New Mexico. Now, right along with that, I must just share quickly is that I also do consulting with other growers, because I guess it runs in the blood. It's hard not to just keep exciting things to yourself. So we do offer consulting services and do work with other vegetable crops and pecans in the state and in southern New Mexico, respectively. This is my son here out in the chili pepper field this past year. And our objective is to help other farmers grow healthy food as well as ourselves. That said, I want to flip to the next slide here. And I tell people, you know, what we do is we farm worms. And we just so happen to produce pecans on top of them. But the point of this slide here is this is a common, if you would come to my farm and throw your shovel in the dirt, hopefully in the soil, hopefully you would find something like this. And this is something that's happened here. We've noticed since we started applying carbon to the soil in the form of even humates specifically, is our earthworm population started to explode literally almost overnight. And my experience in the past, even working with my dad, working in tree fruit, working in row crops, I've never seen anything like this. So we had very few earthworms. Most pecan growers specifically, but even most desert growers here in the Southwest, it's hard to find a worm on your farm. That's pretty typical. So this is what you'll typically find now. Now, people often ask, how did you get these worms? Where do I get them? How do I put them out there in the field? And I like to illustrate it this way, that, you know, if you want to have bluebirds in your backyard, your wife would like bluebirds. So I've never met anyone yet that went to the pet store and bought a bunch of bluebirds and then let them go in their yard. But they first put up the bluebird house, and then the bluebirds show up. That's typically how you achieve your goal of getting birds to come to your neighborhood, is you provide a house and you provide food, and then they typically show up. Now, the same principle applies with earthworms, is what we have learned. If you want earthworms, you need to basically provide a food and house for them to thrive in, and they will multiply rather quickly. So what we found here is that on our farm, we didn't have many earthworms. We started applying humates. We started cover cropping in the fall of 2017. Contacted a man named David Johnson, which is part of NMSU. Some of you are probably aware of what he does and teaches. And basically is a stress on biology in the soil, cover cropping, regenerative practices. So I had contact for David Johnson. I reached out to him. He came out to the farm, and I said, I want to start changing this farm. I believe in the principles. I know it's possible, but I've never done it. I've never cover cropped under trees before. And so he helped us get started. And he basically said, here's a mix that I used back, the last several years. You can order it from this company, and had 7 species in it and cost $80 an acre. And I went I bought and I said 40 acres, we're going to do 30% of our farm right away. So we implemented it. And long story short, within about 3 months, we knew that this was going to be the future. So what we started seeing was when you have growing roots in your soil and you're putting out carbon, you're feeding the worms, those roots are a habitat for your earthworms to thrive. And so these earthworms started to not just be little tiny worms, they started to grow into giant worms and night crawlers. And they didn't die. They seemed like they kept living even year after year. And so this has been a work in progress, but this is where the process starts with an earthworm. On our farm, what I started noticing, one day I dug up a piece of soil, and as you can see here on the screen, this little egg where I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but this is an earthworm egg. And I popped one of these open. I thought, what is this thing? And it was ripe and ready to hatch, and out popped right above it. That's an earthworm coming out of its egg. And so I learned through that experience that earthworms hatch. They reproduce by eggs. They hatch. I'm sure most of all of you already knew this, but for me, it was news. I'd never seen the process. So now it's very typical and common to see earthworm eggs out there and even find them hatching at times. So it's a pretty exciting process. Now, what we started realizing was that it's an amazing creation. It is truly amazing in the way that the earth, the soils are trying to live. And we as farmers have came in with our nice tools and our fun implements, and we're trying to grow crops. We're trying to make money. So the soil's trying to do what it does best, and that is heal itself, repair, cover itself, and regenerate. And we farmers come in, we want to make money. And so we bring in our tools and we start chiseling, we start ripping, turning the soil. We start abusing it. But amazing thing about soil is that it always is trying to heal. The problem most of the time is man in that process. And so what we decided to do is to take our farm operation and say, we believe in this approach, it works. It's a matter of getting out of the way and letting the earth do what it does best, and that is regenerate itself, and letting the soil work as it's intended to. So everything we do on our farm now, we ask this question: am I hurting or helping my soil biology and my earthworms by this practice? So it impacts how often we cultivate, or if we ever cultivate. It impacts how, going and spraying herbicide, just because it kind of looks a little messy out there. It impacts how much irrigation water I let out onto the field. All these things are impacted by this guiding core principle of, am I hurting or helping my soil biology and my earthworms? So we've kind of taken our operation that direction. We grow earthworms, they're abundant under there. What's happening here is that soil there where this worm egg is in, that's a piece of sandy soil. You can see a few sand particles, but it's really dark and it's clumped together. That means that there's good biology and they're holding that together. That's sand. It should just kind of, melt in your hand, but it's turning into soil is what's happening. Here's the secret to taking sand and turning it into soil. This next slide here, you can see these cracks through the soil. We've got all this little, you could look like volcanic residue or something. That's earthworm castings. And they're amazing creatures because they basically are going to work from coming up to the surface. They're putting out all these castings behind them. They turn around and go back down. They take food and they take carbon. They take residues down with them. They eat it as they go. It creates airways It creates improved drainage. The water doesn't sit on top so bad. I think this is much better than buying a ripper and ripping our farm. We've found that this is a much better way to till and deep rip. So this is our new method for tillage. We rarely run a tillage implement through our soil today. Last fall, we decided that, we know worms are a benefit. I've heard to the tune of 24 tons per acre, you can produce earthworm castings at that rate if you have a heavy worm population on your farm. I don't know what our population is, what it should be, what it could be, but what I know is this is not uncommon to see this. And if you think about going and spreading a ton of chicken manure or compost of some sort, a ton an acre is not very much. It just leaves a skiff in your field of residue. So if the whole field looked like this, I might bargain to say that's about a 5 ton an acre of worm castings right there, just what you're looking at on that screen right there, possibly. So I decided it would be good if we would implement a testing system to really know what's the earthworm producing for us? What is it doing for us? So we took a sample of a normal soil test, the top 6 inches, and we took a sample of these worm castings you see. I had, the men went out one morning and maybe spent an hour raking these castings into a baggie, and we sent that off with a soil test alone. And side by side, they tested the top 6 inches of that field. Then they tested the worm castings. The top 6 inches of the field was about 2 to 2.5 organic matter. I can't remember the exact number, but it's right in that range. The worm castings came back at 4% organic matter. So what that tells me is that we need more worms. We need many worms. They are agents of change in our soil. They are taking our soils from desert sand and literally turning it into a forest floor, just going through their gut. Not to mention the bacteria and fungi that's going on in that process. That's kind of a whole nother topic, but we'll get into that if we have time. So we have livestock under the soil is the way I like to think about it. These livestock, they don't bother you if you don't bother them. If you bother them, they'll disappear. And so it's like we're trying to feed them and nurture them just like you would a cattle or sheep operation. So in the first year, 2018, we started managing the farm completely from day one ourselves. That year looked like it was set up for potentially a record crop. It seemed like the farm, I think that year did produce a record crop. It was about to the tune of 2,600 pounds per acre. Don't know that that was all attributed to our change in practices at that point, because it was too early on to really attribute all that to the change in practice. But we grew that crop with about 50 pounds of urea for our nitrogen input. The other input was some liquid fish fertilizer that we used to gain a little bit of nitrogen. Certainly not equal units to what the conventional approach would require, but we started putting liquid fish out for our fertilizer and foliar feeding our crop and putting down humates and cover cropping. That was the system that we decided to implement. We picked a record crop that year we harvested, and since that time, I guess it gave us confidence to jump in with both feet, and since then we've not had to apply any synthetic nitrogen on the farm. This next slide here, 2 years ago, after going to one of the classes that Gabe Brown and Ray Archuleta put on here in southern New Mexico, I had read Dirt to Soil, which is Gabe Brown's book, and it was all these things I knew were true, but we just weren't at the place we were ready to jump off the cliff and say we're going all in. After I read his book, I decided that every day I waited was a day of delay. And so we jumped in. We started looking for a herd of livestock. talking to different people, it seemed like sheep might be the best approach for us in this region. So we invested in a herd of 100 sheep. This was back in 2019, around Thanksgiving. At the same time, a friend of mine I was looking to hire to help manage the farm here as I was growing in my busyness with consulting work. And he agreed, and he already had some sheep. Some of the colored sheep here in this picture were his. We bought 100 head of white Dorper St. Croix cross sheep. And we went ahead and bought about 6 miniature cattle as well. And we ran them together on the farm. Our idea here is to have a truly regenerative farm. We believe that you have to have a full cycle, and in other words, if you're not going to apply nutrients, you need a nutrient cycle. And it's difficult to do without animals or some form of input, compost, some form of input. Cover crops alone can take you amazing places. But in talking to guys that have taken their operations all the way, it's evident that livestock are a major component of truly regenerating soil. So as we looked at our pecan farm, we thought, you know, we've got these 30-foot tall trees. There's really not much fruit below 6 foot in the farm on the tree hanging down. There's not many nuts down that low. Why can't we graze these cover crops that we're growing? So that was what contributed to this decision, but we went ahead and invested in the sheep and decided to put them in a dry lot until spring, and the pruning was finished after harvest. The brush was all shred. And then we agreed that we would go ahead and move them onto the farm, and we would bale graze them in paddocks each day and move them every day. The idea is that we wanted to have a manure spreader out there. And so these were our manure spreader. Excuse me there, sorry about that. This sheep herd was our manure spreader. So we took them out and set up between 2 and 3 acre paddocks, and we started grazing. We did this by moving a truck and a trailer. I have a picture of that a little bit later. We had a truck with water tanks and a trailer with bale on it, and so they would eat off the trailer, but then they would scatter their manure throughout that couple acre piece. So we started grazing like this, and then as spring came on, we planted the covers. The covers grew up. By April, we were grazing on a cover crop, something similar to this picture. This is a pretty common sight here on the farm. What we started noticing was we were using a lot less diesel, and it's pretty exciting, a lot less man hours out there mowing down this vegetation. Put this picture in here. It's kind of like one of those pictures you've seen on your great grandmother's wall from years ago. It's pretty blurry, kind of looks like a painting. But you know, it's interesting, in the last 100 years since World War II, really, the synthetic fertilizer approach is very new. And it's certainly not the way things used to be done. Before there was trains and transportation, people have farmed for centuries. You know, it's been around for a long time. And so this picture to me just brings to mind how it's really been done for thousands of years. And only in the last 70 or so, 7,500 years, have we started applying synthetic fertilizers. And so this approach is not new. We're not doing anything new. It's fairly old. But it's pretty exciting because now for 3 generations, we've known nothing of this. Many of us have known nothing of this approach. Here's a really pretty, I guess, just look at that picture on the left. you'll see is ready to be grazed. The sheep are actually out there on that left pasture. Probably within a few hours, they were turned into that when this picture was taken, maybe even a few minutes later it was taken. On the right-hand side of the tree was grazed the day before. So as you can see, they really mow it off for us. And there's a little residue that's left and trampled with their manure and urine, so it's really a good setup for applying nutrients to your soil. Here is what I was talking about of the livestock water. And this is on wheels. So every day you just fire the rig up and pull forward about 100 yards or less, and you're in the next 2 to 3 acre paddock. So that's really what it looks like to water, keep the livestock watered. The bale in the trailer was necessary before the cover crops grew up. This is how we grazed, is just putting a bale in this trailer. This picture here, this is early, let's see, late March. The leaves are just coming out, early first week of April. The cover crop's about 3 inches, 4 inches tall, and it's just barely big enough to start grazing. That takes a little bit of management, of course, and getting to the right paddock, knowing when to start so that you don't damage it, so that it can regrow. But what we started seeing is after we did this for a season, we noticed that we had to pull off, first of all, we had to pull off livestock due to regulations, I believe it's 110 days. It's something in that neighborhood before harvest, legally, to not apply any manure, just for food safety. So August 1st, we pull off the livestock off the farm, and it's a little disappointing because we have to bale feed them, in a feed lot, basically, for till next spring. And so that's one challenge we deal with here. But what we noticed is we flipped over some cow pies, and the earthworms and the beetles were in there destroying those cow pies. And 30 days after we pull the livestock off the farm, it's very hard to find any residue of manure. Extremely difficult. Everything is decomposing at such a pace that I would love to graze up till about 45 days from harvest because of how quickly everything is incorporated. Now, that's not possible for us, so we don't at this time. But when you farm regeneratively, it truly is regenerative. Everything that we've known as problems is based on a dead system, a soil system that's dead. So if you would take my animals over to our neighbor's where he's spraying pre-emerge, he has a bare soil all summer long, and we graze the livestock. You could probably walk out there today and find a bunch of manure on the top because there's no system in place. There's no earthworm pulling that manure down. There's no biology attaching it, breaking it down, feeding, turning that into basically organic matter. There's no system. So back to the whole tool approach is man has destroyed the system with our tools. And what we're attempting to do is to use a lot less of our tools and more of what I'm going to say is God's tools. It's the way that it was designed to work, is livestock and the mob grazing approach. So that's what we're trying to do here on the farm. Often, when you go to these meetings or you share this with people, cover cropping, no-tilling, livestock, they'll say, well, yeah, but we don't get that kind of rain where we live, that wouldn't work. Or we don't have the same weather that you have. That's a common one. And it's true, not everyone has 5 acre-feet of irrigation water. I won't deny that. But, there's all kinds of excuses, I guess, is the point. And as I looked at this before we started, I didn't have any excuses. So to me, if there's anyone that doesn't have an excuse, it's a pecan grower in the Southwest United States. And it's simply because we have all kinds of water, because pecans require it. We have abundant sunlight, Talk about sunlight, 300 and I think 60 days out of the year, there's sun that shines through here in Las Cruces, something like that, 350. And we're without excuse. And so as I thought about the winter weather, we barely get hard freezes. Um, Crops can grow year round down here if you plant winter species. We don't have hand labor walking around in our fields picking our crop. It's done manually. So many benefits, so many reasons. So I couldn't find any excuses to not do this. I would have had to make them up. But there's always excuses. You can find them, but it does rain here. This picture shows you it's what it looks like pouring off of our house when it rains for 15 minutes or so at our place. Wanted to talk just a little bit about terminating cover crops, different approaches to this. One we tried last year before harvest. Everyone always asks when they come onto the farm, they say, so how do you deal with all that biomass before harvest? Because I don't have livestock, I can't graze it. How do you deal with it? Well, this was on an old flood system, irrigation system. We grew cover crops, probably had about 4 to 5 ton of above ground biomass. And we started in 2018, we started crimping the cover crop once it reached maturity. We built a homemade 15-foot wide crimper, went on the back of the tractor. I don't have a picture of it. And we would crimp it down in late June or early June, crimp it again in July if needed, and then before harvest, come in and mow it off to the ground. And all of that biomass of above ground biomass was then in small shreddings on the soil surface. About right now, October, the first week of October, we like to come in and shred that and get it ready for harvest. Now, like I mentioned about the cow pies and the manure, the biology healthy system decomposes residues fairly rapidly. So our harvester, he's a very conventional neighbor of ours. He harvests our pecan crop, and frankly, I think we're one of the favorite farms of his to harvest because he doesn't have a mud problem. The pecans pick up very nicely. You might have a little bit of stubble residue out there, but till December, it's very limp. It's no problem whatsoever to harvest on top of a cover cropped system. Now we graze, so we don't have a major concern. We don't have very much above ground biomass anyway, but grazing it, you're constantly mowing it down with the livestock. Last fall, we decided to try burning before harvest, burning down the remaining vegetation about this time of year. And so I wouldn't necessarily say it's a very necessary thing to do. It lasted about 2 weeks. In late October, we had some new grasses kind of springing back through after we tried burning it off. So what we do, unfortunately, we use herbicide very, very modestly, and we spray 13 ounces per acre of Roundup here in about 2 weeks to kill any small mustard or anything that could create a problem for harvest. So instead of burning like this picture, we go through and use a light rate of herbicide, and it just knocks down the little 1/2-inch tall mustard plants that are starting to grow so that we can then harvest in December without any issue, any vegetation. But there's no field work that needs to be done other than that prior to harvest. I want to just move on here. I know we're taking up some time, but this happened last year about late October. These freezes came in and it froze for like 36 hours here in Mesquite. It dumped snow, as you can see. Kind of a pretty Christmas picture, but you wouldn't guess this was like October the 25th, maybe, in 2020. Kind of a rare event. Why I'm showing this picture is what happened to some growers, and a lot of producers the year prior also experienced the same thing. Is it froze early and they had stick tights. In the pecan world, a stick tight is when it freezes before the pecan is mature. and the hull, the outer part of the pecan, will never open up. And so the pecan begins to actually shrink inside the nut, and it sticks tight to the hull. So it's not a viable nut anymore. It'll be kicked out at the processors. These early freezes in October, the last 2 seasons, have left many growers with between 10% stick tights up to, I've heard of 50% stick tights. Extremely disappointing. Not everyone, but there are pockets of growers with this problem. When you have regenerative, healthy soil, when you're not feeding synthetics, but when it's naturally, it's harvesting the sunlight through the cover crop, pumping that liquid carbon through the root exudates into your soils, your earthworms are there, your biology is there, converting nutrients, your animals are putting the best form of nutrients right to your plants. What we believe is that a healthier plant produces obviously a healthier nut, but also much more resilient to disaster, much more resilient to early freezes. I don't know what our percentage was exactly, but I don't believe we had more than a couple percent stick tights the last 2 seasons. And it's unfortunate for many growers, but when you have a healthy soil, that plant is able to mature even a bit sooner, and the nuts are able to mature and open up. So kind of an exciting thing about regenerative farming is you have a healthier crop, but it's also a healthier, more resilient plant to withstand, natural disasters, you might say. I wanted to just share a little bit more about our operation. We did put in an irrigation system this past winter. Thanks to the guys in NRCS, we were very excited to be able to implement a better system. We've been cover cropping and doing grazing on a flood system, but now we're privileged to put in sprinklers, above ground sprinklers. So we spent about 8 weeks last winter with a crew of about 10 men, and we installed a sprinkler system on the farm. It was a lot of fun, took a lot of hard work and sweat, but sprinklers to us is another step towards regenerating our soil. Flood irrigation, I don't know anyone who would tell you that getting a flood from a hurricane or something like that was just the greatest thing that ever happened to their farm. And yet here in this part of the world, we flood our fields weekly or every other week. And it's pretty silly. In a lot of ways, it's really not the most efficient form of irrigation, even though it does work and there are other side benefits. We felt sprinklers would be the best way forward for our operation and conserving water, more efficiently delivering water to the trees. So we installed this system. It was pretty intense. Certain times we went ahead and dug a pond. This is to hold the river water, and then we irrigate out of this pond through the sprinkler system to deliver our Rio Grande water supply. This is something I guess not too many folks in this area do, or maybe even think is possible. We didn't know if it would be, but it seems to be working. I just wanted to wrap up here with this. When my time here is up, what will have really mattered? And, I think life is just too short to not deal with the real issues and to not go to the hard places, to not deal with the root causes of problems. And just remembering the land is not ours. We are stewards. And this has been something that I just continually every week when I meet with a farm manager, we just often talk about this, that we are just stewards and we want to be wise stewards of the land. And the question, or the statement rather, that what is in my hand today is what I am responsible of. I just think this is a powerful truth. Instead of getting too concerned about everyone else or for us here, what we should have done 10 years ago, we just look at today and say, what can we do today? What are we responsible for today? And that really helps guide us. And then lastly is just wise stewards leave things better than they found it. And that's what we want to be. hopefully I can leave my sons God willing, we'll leave a farm that's in better condition than when we found it. And we know how the cycle works. There's always more work to be done. There's always more to improve on. And this last slide is just a reminder to me of how beautiful life really is in the desert. And we have a lot of sweet opportunities just to stop and smell the roses. This kind of farming has returned the fun back into the farming. I've had our growers that we work with tell us the same thing. And there's still disappointments, there's still hard things, but it's fun to be working with the system instead of against it. Decision making, all those kinds of things. It's a lot of fun. So with that, I think that's all that I have, Mark, at this time.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. That was just terrific. And what a great story and what a great inspiration. And beautiful pictures to go along and illustrate everything there. So we really appreciate your sharing all those with us. And we've got about 10 minutes right now that I'd like to open this up for questions and discussion for everybody in the audience. So if you have something that you'd like to ask Josh, maybe just hit the, let's see, someplace there's a raise hand icon up there, but you can either raise your hand or just chime in. I don't think we're going to have everybody talking at once. So go ahead and key your mic when you're ready, and go ahead and ask Josh whatever's on your mind for right now.
Hey, Josh, this is Jim Armendariz. I've got a quick question. So as far as inputs, you're still applying the humus and you're still applying the fish fertilizer, and looks like you're slowly weaning yourself off of these inputs. Is it realistic to someday achieve this pecan farming without any outside inputs?
My goal would be to run myself out of business on the consulting side, because we do sell products and inputs. And if we continue to use livestock and cover crops, I believe we could get, I'm going to say, down to about a 20% input budget. I don't know if it's realistic to say 100%, because we may have to settle for a less than ideal crop. And I like to push the needle when it comes to cropping, like every farmer. So I think it's possible, but our goal right now is to get to about 50% of the inputs of a standard farmer within about 2 years. And I think it's possible. There's guys that put 0 inputs on and grow the best crops out there. So I do think it's possible. I think it might take us several years to get there. Maybe the 5-year picture, we could about be there.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. And awesome story.
Thank you.
Good morning, Josh. This is Mauro Herrera from Deming. Just wonderful story that you just told us. Quick question on preparing for harvesting. Majority of the pecan growers, they like to go and prepare the land and make it as a bare ground, compacted and ready to go and pick up the nuts. How do you prepare your land, since you said that you have to withdraw your cattle 110 days prior to harvesting? Just by curiosity, how you do your preparation for harvesting?
Good question. We basically come in at the end of the growing season, which is right now. Like today and tomorrow, we're going to wrap up mowing our farm. We mow it with a flail mower, like a Verissimo or just a 3-point mower. And we mow it down to the ground. And so there's grass right now that's knee high on certain parts of the farm. That's all going to get mowed down, look like a mowed lawn. And then within about a week, we come in with our very light rate of herbicide. The only reason we do that is because mustard can grow all winter and be very tall by December if you do not kill mustard. That is how we prepare. We don't do anything more than that. And the residue of the grass, it is no issue. If farmers ask you about that residue, if they don't have a system in place and they have really thick grass, maybe they will have kind of an issue getting the nuts up. But most typically, The only people that ask those questions are the people that have not ever done it. So once you do it once, you realize it's really not an issue. That's been our experience.
Wonderful. Have you ever used the cover crop and just harvested an inch high and then try to harvest your crops? I have some other growers around the area that they tried once, did not have the system ready, but they say instead of absorbing the nuts with the dirt and the leaves, it's a lot easier for the equipment just to absorb the leaves and the nut instead of the dirt. But I don't know if you ever tried to harvest it with the crop, I mean short crop, and just go and harvest the pecan nuts.
You might need to clarify the question, but a little
If you
bit.
use the cover crop, just spread the cover crop not too low, kind of prior to harvesting. I would say a week prior to harvesting, and leave the cover crop even in a green, if it is green, maybe an inch, 2 inches tall, and go ahead and harvest your crop. How difficult would be?
Ask me in about 3 months. We're getting ready to plant 24 acres of cover crop here next week, and we're planning to not herbicide that. I mean, we're going to herbicide it for weeds. We're going to plant a new cover crop. It should be about 2 to 3 inches tall at harvest. We're going to harvest on it and hope it just takes off after harvest and keeps growing. So good question. I think it's possible. That's why I want to try it. I think it could be big for growers to actually come in October and plant cover crops, harvest in December, and then it's off to the races. You have a growing cover crop all winter long.
Thank you, Josh. It was a great story.
Hey, Josh, I have a question. This is Steve. Did you see increased profits from reducing your inputs? And also, what is the cover crop mix you use?
Great question. So the first year we planted cover crops, I kept a record of just the quality only improvement. I didn't know what we'd find. The quality was about 1.5 to 2 percentage points better where we grew a cover crop. So the pecan quality was better. Just in that improved return on profits from the improved quality, the return per acre was about 150 acres or $150 per acre. And it costed us about 80 to plant. So our return per acre was there just on planting it. That's on a very, just you might say scientific, for farmers that want to see the data. But we have, at this time, we still spend as much on inputs as we ever have, but our yield and quality is consistently climbing. So clearly our profits are increasing. Now our objective is to lower our inputs and not see any decline at all in yield and yield and quality. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. What was your, thank you for doing that. That's important to know. And I appreciate that. What was your cover crop mix?
Yeah, thank you. So the first year, oh boy, it was a 7-way species, but it had oats in it. It might have had a little bit of rye, peas and beans and vetch. And that was our first mix. Following that, every year we put a winter species, and that's our favorite mixes, is to plant them in January, February, latest by March. We like to put about 15-way blends together. So we try to not go less than about 15 species on a winter mix. Several species of vetch, peas, beans, about 3 grasses, whether it's oats, barley, trit, or rye. And then we like to have in there clover, a couple species of clover. That's a big one that grows all summer and fixes a tremendous amount of nitrogen for us. And so those are some of our species. We do have a summer cover crop that we use some, but ideally in a pecan orchard, you plant it before March and you will have very good stand. You'll get lots of vegetation because there's sunlight hitting the floor. After April, there's shade. It's a lot harder to get a stand established.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Josh, this is Daniel. I have a question. Did you ever run? Oh, thanks. I wanted to say what a fantastic testimony that you have, and it just it's just so uplifting to see a farmer such as yourself with talk about these principles that we talk about, but that just living it and working through the challenges and everything. So just thank you so much. The question I had was, have you run into any salt problems? I know some of those areas down there have some salty wells and stuff, but has that ever been a problem for you?
Great question. That question, I talked to several about it a couple years ago before we started all of this, and it has not been. And there could be a couple of reasons, but principally, I think the primary reason is, there's studies that show that rye absorbs salt. When you grow rye, it helps remediate salt out of the soil. I think we need to keep first things first, and that is the sun is the only positive input into the system. So the best way to remediate toxicities is to pump in liquid carbon. The only way to achieve that is to put out solar panels in the form of cover crops. Plants are the only thing that'll actually capture sunlight and do anything with it that's of value. So, if you have cover crops, what we found is those root exudates, that liquid carbon that you're pumping into your soil, feeds the biology, and the biology are the best. We have found one of the best ways to remediate salt toxicities is by having ample biology in your soil. We put out compost tea every month. It's a very beneficial multi-species derived from worm castings and compost. That is probably our best way we remediate salt, not only on this farm, but on vegetables and other farms in New Mexico, is using a very highly dynamic and diverse compost tea solution. People will say you need a leach salt. It's the only way to deal with them. I'm not going to say they're not right. I don't think it's the only way. I think biology is the secret. And keeping your ground covered with growing cover crops seems to be the best way to counter a salty soil, is bring in the life. And so I might have got off there. I'm sorry if I did. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. That's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josh. I wish that we had just about a whole day to just spend visiting with you, because I have a feeling we could go on and on with the questions, and I wish we could. But I do want to respect everybody's time, including yours. I know you've got a lot going on. We had one question that came in from our acting state conservationist, Rosabeth, asking about any problems that you have to be aware of, or anything that you've run into with the above ground, or I should say with the sprinkler system that you've got now for irrigation. Anything that people need to keep in mind with that, as far as watching out for any problems with the livestock running through the orchards there?
Great question. We were asked that question before we ever installed them, and our answer was we don't know. It's just one big trial. And it's a trial as in we've not done it before. We're going to find out. And so amazingly, few sprinklers are damaged from the livestock, and this involves cattle and sheep. Occasionally, there would be a broken one, very occasionally. But the most common thing was maybe one or two sprinklers, in 10 acres would be unscrewed because the cattle would, bump them with their nose, maybe unscrew them, but the sprinkler's always laying right beside it. And so that's the worst thing that's happened. Worse than the animals and livestock, we did have happen this summer, about late July, is we had a population of snails like I've never seen ever show up on our farm. To tell you the truth, we don't have a solution for it yet. We might have to get geese to graze behind our sheep. But the truth is, they're multiplying like crazy. It's wet out there all the time. We don't let the soil doesn't dry out. And so the snails will crawl up the pipe to the sprinkler head, and they'll sit, because there was water there, they'll sit on that sprinkler spinner. It's an R10 Nelson rotator, and that spinner rotator will not rotate. So you fire up the irrigation and it just sits there and sprays. So what that looks like is we go out there with our hip waders and spend 2 hours knocking, literally driving down every row, bumping with a stick the sprinkler head to knock the snails off. A little frustrating. Doesn't take as long as it did to flood irrigate, I'll tell you. But we got to figure out something, either a way to get them things in a food chain, or put something on the pipe so they cannot climb up that pipe to the sprinkler. But yeah, there's our biggest concern we've had. Started here 2 months ago.
That's quite interesting. I'm wondering if you have escargot in your future, Josh. Oh, hey, I hate to do this, but I think we're going to have to cut off questions. Josh, thank you so much for spending the time with us this morning and sharing your story and giving us some of the details of the management that you've been using here and some of the results that you've been seeing. This is just really, really inspiring, and we appreciate your time very much. I'm not gonna open this up to everybody, but if you're willing to have people contact you, if people have more questions, maybe after we're done here, if you could send me your contact information, or just let me know if that's okay. I've got your contact information. Just let me know if it's okay for people to contact you. I'm sure that there's a lot more questions out there, and if you've got the time and you're willing to share that, there's lots of us that would love to follow up with you on that.
Absolutely, Mark, and feel free to share that. You can email me. I may or may not, depending on how busy we are. This is our slowest time of year, of course. We're waiting on harvest. But if there's enough interest, maybe someday we would have an on-site field, day and with your crew. So that's something they could keep in mind for the future, for sure. Be open.
Hey, thanks so much, because that is exactly where we would like to go with this team. And that's something that we're hoping that we can repeat all around the state. So I appreciate that offer very much. And I'm sure that one of us is going to be following up with you. So
Great. That's wonderful.
Thanks again, Josh.
And
thanks everybody for the questions and the participation here. We're running just a little bit behind schedule, and I do want to respect your time. So I would just like to remind everybody, this is the first call that we've had like this, and I think it's been a resounding success. So we appreciate everybody pitching in and helping us out with that. And every other month, we'd like to continue this. And we're looking for more people who have farmers and ranchers that you're working with, who are also doing an outstanding job with their soil health management and their stewardship and their regenerative practices. So I'm going to open it up as an invitation to everybody. If you've got people you're working with that we can all learn from, please let us know. And we already have a list of some folks started from the people on our state soil health team, but I know there's more out there. So please keep that in mind and keep us in the loop on other people that you work with that can also help us all to learn. And with that, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to turn it over to my boss, Steve Cadis. And Steve has some final words for us. And I think we're going to be interested in hearing some of the news that Steve has to share with us. So Steve, go ahead and take it away.
Well, Mark, thank you so much. And Josh, thank you so much. What a blessing to all of us to hear your adventure with soil health and with your family and with your farm. I really appreciate that, because NRCS, we're at a point right now where we are really growing in soil health. And as employees and people are interested in focused on conservation, hearing your message right there is a great inspiration to all of us. So I appreciate that. And for those of you who've had the soil health training and have been digging into this, I hope that you heard all four of the principles as Josh was talking today, because he went over them again and again and again. And you can, if you don't have those four principles memorized, that's my challenge to you today, is to memorize those things, not just for an exercise, but when you memorize those things, it engages your brain into seeing these things out in the field or hearing it when a producer talks about it. And those 4 principles are basically God's model of how soils develop and how they can become healthy and how they are maintained in a healthy state. So anyway, get to know those 4 principles. One other thing is soil health is about a living ecosystem. And what is an ecosystem? It's a home. And that's one of the other things that you heard Josh talk about is you don't go out and release bluebirds, you build a home for them and then they come. That's exactly what soil health is about. It's about building and maintaining a home that's undisturbed for all of these microorganisms that benefit the soil. Finally, as many of you have probably seen, I'm retiring this month, and I've been with NRCS for over 34 years now, and it has been a blast. And one of the things, it's kind of sad, but it's kind of great, is throughout my whole career, soil health or soil quality has not really been a focus, although that's where the agency started back in the 30s with Hugh Hammond Bennett. When you read Hugh Hammond Bennett's stuff, it's all about soil health. We just didn't call it that back in those days. So I'm glad that the agency is coming back to this and we're really focusing on it. But really, it has been an excitement in the last 10 years. It's been an exciting thing for me. And when I really latched onto it, I knew this is what NRCS is all about. It's about soil health. When you look at our practices, when you look at our planting process, it's really about soil health, folks. So your role in this and your challenge is not for you to become experts on every part of soil health, but for you to start gaining knowledge and to be a lead and a guide and to support to farmers and ranchers around there. And they will take off with it. Look how Josh just took off with this. If you lead and support and guide folks, they'll take it and they'll make it their own and they'll be innovative with it with you. So thanks again for a good 34 years. I've known some of you almost my entire career, and some of you are brand new, and I just want to welcome you and encourage you in NRCS. It's really a great agency. Make the most of it. And thank you, Mark. Appreciate the time.
Steve, thanks so much for those final comments and for wrapping it up like that. And I'd just like to say, while we've got everybody with us, I want to thank you personally for your leadership and for making soil health a priority among our team so that we can help the people out in the field make this more of a reality with the farmers and ranchers that we're all trying to help. And I appreciate your help and your friendship and your guidance very much, Steve. So thank you with that, and fair winds and following seas and retirement, and save a place for us.
I will do.
Hey, thanks everybody. We appreciate you're all joining in today. And thanks again, Josh, for a terrific presentation. And I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we'll be in touch soon. Take care.